In the early 2000s, Star Wars games ran rampant. From movie tie-ins to tactical shooters to the most insane force wielders, it covered all corners of the galaxy. A stark contrast from the Star Wars games over the last decade. We've got support for a decade-old MMO, 2 Battlefront games, 2 Jedi games, and Squadrons. So, here comes Star Wars Outlaws, the first single-player open-world Star Wars games in nearly 2 decades. Outlaws feels like it has a lot riding on it, particularly for Ubisoft, but also for Star Wars fans for a franchise that just can't really generate any true momentum at the minute. Disclaimer, I am one of those Star Wars fans, a big one in that. In many ways, Outlaws reminds me of Respawn's first attempt at the Jedi series, a case where Outlaws is more than the sum of its parts. Star Wars Outlaws has many flaws, strange design decisions, and for that, it's hard to disagree with the spread of scores that it received at launch. But I also feel like it just doesn't make a good first impression. In fact, I think its opening hours shine the brightest light on the game's shortcomings. It also comes in very hot at launch, including me receiving a game-breaking bug during the final 5 minutes of the final mission. And yet, despite those flaws, this is one of, if not the, most authentic Star Wars experience I've ever played. Just like the prequels, it stumbles out of the blocks outside of a moment here or there. But by the end, it really comes together for something to really cherish here. The fact is, there is nothing like it. Nothing else immerses you in the Star Wars universe in the way that this game can. Eating Star Wars version of chili con carne with your best friend. Getting in with a slimy monstrosity that is Jabba the Hutt as you double cross the Pikes. Chilling in a cantina, playing some sabacc, and feeling in a truly lived Star Wars world. Did I mention that Nix is one of the greatest ever designed Star Wars creatures and companions, and they put a trench coat on a commando droid? The fact is, if Star Wars has never been your jam, I'm not sure this is going to do much to change that. But this game's biggest strength is how much it is authentic to the IP. Massive Entertainment are wizards at creating immersive worlds, and they've created a game here that makes you truly feel like you exist in the Star Wars underworld, meaning that despite a really poor, tedious opening few hours, facial animations that feel from a long time ago, and enemy AI that belongs in a galaxy far away, if you're willing to risk it all, the galaxy is full of opportunity. I mentioned that Star Wars Outlaws reminds me in many ways of Jedi Fallen Order. Fallen Order was the jack of all trades, master of Star Wars. And much can be said for Star Wars Outlaws. There's such a breadth of things to do in Outlaws, so much to talk about and discuss. So I want to break this review down into 4 key areas. The story and the characters, the combat and the encounters, the open world and activities, and the Star Wars IP itself. So let's begin with the story. You play as K-Vess, a scoundrel on the run for a failed heist job. She's got a target on her back, and in a bid to buy her freedom, she opts in for the heist of a lifetime. One thing that's integral to any strong Star Wars project is its crew. Luke, Han and Leia, Obi-Wan, Anakin and Ahsoka, Cal, Grease, Sarah and Merrin. Many more examples of course. So in this one, if we're talking about a heist, it's important that the crew is memorable. As you gather the members to pull off the ultimate heist, your crew starts to come together piece by piece, and it never really feels like it's amounting to much. But by the end, it's a fantastic crew that pays off. Nix is genuinely, and I'm not even overstating it, one of the most incredibly designed, not just creatures, but companions in Star Wars, period. From how Nix looks, to the effectiveness in combat, to real moments in the game that made me feel something. I think Humbly, who plays Kay, and the work that Massive did a really great job of making you feel that love and that dynamic between Kay and Nix. There's a moment in the game where someone takes Nix, and the emotion and the delivery from Kay in that scene is really felt, like it hit me big time, and I was desperate to get Nix back. Throw into the mix a commando droid in a trench coat, and it's a winner. I don't think it's a really memorable story, or that Kay's arc herself is a really strong one, but I do think that by the end, it's a satisfying Star Wars adventure. It does a commendable job in onboarding anyone who maybe isn't the biggest Star Wars fan, but for those that are, there's plenty to chew on and digest. Memorable cameos that, just like the Respawn games, they don't feel forced and thrown in your face, and they fit the overall narrative. By the end of the game, I really did like my crew, and Massive did a great job of exploring the nature of the underworld in the Star Wars universe where nobody has your back and everyone is willing to double cross you. Star Wars always has the funny little guys, and Ankh deserves a special shout out for being one of those characters that is a Star Wars staple, alongside the greatness that is Babu Frick. Overall, it's a strong cast of characters with a good overall plot. I particularly enjoyed how quests could take you from the ground of one planet into space for a dogfight, and then you jet off across hyperspace into another planet, and that quest would then resume there. It captured that feeling of adventure. It obviously doesn't help that Andor told a near perfect story with its heists, but the difference here is you're playing it. And I think for that reason, it's worth experiencing. It's definitely a story that really does take a while to get going, not just in its moments, but with its characters too. But them final few hours, they really do wrap it up in a satisfying manner that is fitting of a Star Wars heist, and it marks this crew as memorable. At least to me. And for Ubisoft games that often lack a compelling cast, that's a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Perhaps one of the most divisive areas of Star Wars Outlaws is the game's combat and mechanics. This combat is fun. Eventually. It is very simple, and there's not much depth to it mechanically. The game though again creates a really poor first impression. It's not quite that, oh, it gets good after 15 hours. It's never bad, it just gets better and better. But it's a game that really does feel like you progress. It helps make Kay's journey feel like she's becoming this outlaw alongside the narrative beats. In the opening 5 hours of the game, you're forced into 2 auto-fail stealth scenarios. Looking back now after finishing this game, it's just a really baffling decision. So to be clear, there are multiple auto-fail stealth scenarios in this game. However, in some circumstances, you can actually get into combat without triggering the alarm. Part 2 is that in the early scenarios, one of the decisions they make is that at the start of the game, you have a really limited selection of tools to use to your advantage during these stealth sections. One of those tools is your stun component on your blaster, except in these early missions, this is disabled, so it makes it just feel weird. These stealth scenarios, they are all carefully crafted, but yeah, if this turns you off in the opening few hours, fair enough, but yeah, like, it's only bad at the beginning of the game. By the end, you can regenerate your stun shot quickly, bluff people so they don't press the alarm or snitch on you, wait till you get close enough and then take them out, or just straight up shoot them, so that as long as you don't blow up a camera, or they set the alarm off, you're alright. I can't blame people for getting to about 5 hours and going, nah, not for me. But by hour 25 as I rolled credits, I felt like a really well equipped scoundrel to deal with these situations. And that's helped by a steady progression system that feels fun and different from the monotonous level skill trees. So, progression is actually finding specialists and performing objectives to level up. These are scattered throughout the planet, so when you first arrive on a planet you will be given a little bit of information as to where you can find these specialists, and after that each will have a mission that you need to do before you can unlock their tree of abilities. Like for example, meeting Lando, you have to win a high stakes match of Sabacc before you can unlock his core ability and then his tree of abilities. The subsequent abilities are then kept behind challenges and items. The items are scattered throughout the open world, and the challenges are for you to complete in the game. For example, like kill 3 Death Troopers in a row, complete a 500-foot speeder jump, stun an enemy after using fast talk to distract him, get Nick to perform a certain activity. Starfield tried something similar to this, but it didn't work well there. It does work well here. It helps progression feel different to usual, but it also helps you make the most of your suite of abilities so that you don't forget about them. It's a really welcome change in formula from traditional Ubisoft games. There's a lot said about the game's combat. Animations definitely feel a little stiff. definitely a little clunky. But I don't know man, I never found the combat to be not fun. It does start off limited, but you can really customize and play how you want to by the end. Modifying your blaster's rate of fire, so what kind of shot do you want? Do you want the normal shot? Do you want a rapid fire? Do you want a more heavy approach? Do you want to take the quiet stealth approach in combat, or do you want to go all guns blazing? There are, however, really weird design choices in combat too. So the only weapon that you have is your blaster, but you can pick up more powerful weapons in the world, my favourite being the Death Trooper's E11D. But you can't just carry these weapons around with you in the world, so as soon as you interact with something like go in a lift, climb up, you drop it. And not only is that just immersion breaking, it's weird because they only have limited ammo. You can't just fire it forever like your gun anyway, so I don't understand why you can't carry it around. It's just a strange decision. But the combat, just like the constant theme throughout a lot of this review in this game, the longer you play, the better it gets. And by the end, you do feel powerful, and you feel like a gunslinger, using the system equivalent to Red Dead's Deadeye for example. At the start you can only mark 3 targets, and by the end, after you've seen the gunslinger specialist and get through his progression, you can do up to 7 targets and double target elite enemies. And at the start your blaster feels timid, but by the end you can one-shot stormtroopers. The combat itself, it is very simple, and there isn't a lot of depth as to how shootouts will play out. But one thing that I actually quite appreciate is that we're used to laughing at stormtroopers, but at the start, 3 stormtroopers is quite a tough task for Kay. And by the end, if it ain't 3 death troopers, it's a walk in the park. Combat itself, the feeling of it, it isn't helped by enemy AI. The enemy AI in this game it's not good. Flat out, it's just quite poor and it really does break immersion at times. But I do like the game's progression. It applies across much of the game. Your ship shield, speed, guns, your speeder, your blaster, your stealth capabilities. You can mainline this game, but you won't feel that sense of progression waiting for you if you do. And when Massive create an immersive, authentic Star Wars world like this, mainlining it, it's a rookie mistake. Star Wars Outlaws is the first open world Star Wars game in 2 decades. For me, Survivor is still more open zone than open world. This is the first single player Star Wars game where you feel like you can just actually exist in the Star Wars universe. And that's down to multiple systems and activities. No doubt the main draw of this game for many is the game's crime syndicate and reputation system. This is a system where you can gain favour with the various crime syndicates, from the slimy, slobber Jabba the Hutt to the ruthless Kira, most notably from Solo: A Star Wars Story as the leader of the Crimson Dawn. This system is fantastic, even if it is a little bit shallow. It feels responsive to your actions. You piss off one syndicate, you'll get a phone call with a warning for your actions before then being told that a death squad is after you with a target on your back. You build your reputation with a faction, and you reap the rewards of that with access to their camps and parlours, alongside exclusive items from their vendors because you've got a good standing with them, as well as cosmetic rewards with gear bonuses as a result of winning them over. There's no real influence on the game's main path other than one moment in the story, but it does feel alive and responsive to your decisions that you're making. I enjoyed it because it can make a task easier or harder. So most of the syndicate missions end with a choice. You may have started the mission working for the Pikes, but by the end be presented with an offer from the Ishiga clan to screw the Pikes over and gain reputation and rewards with the Ishiga clan over the Pikes. Often with any action you'll frustrate one faction and delight another. The syndicate missions offer up some of the best in the game actually, and really flesh this Star Wars universe out more. They also do a great job of showcasing just how vicious and relentless the Star Wars underworld is. Backstabbings, double crossing, but also the pursuit for power and where that can take you. I always enjoyed meeting the faction leaders and it was a really nice touch, but it's not overdone. Ultimately, I can understand that because there's no real impact of this system in the game, its addition can feel a little undercooked and shallow. But I think its purpose here is warranted, and it adds a new dynamic to exploring around these various planets. If you're not in with the Hutts, exploring Tatooine can be a nightmare. It also made for some fun, dynamic and unique moments in that really having to work to get a component for an upgrade, since all I did was piss the pikes off and their presence on Tashara is huge, so it made exploration around Tashara tough for me. Of course, the crime factions are a bit like the dressings of the world, but there's a ton of activities to experience in Outlaws, and these activities range from okay to really fun actually. Playing Sabacc and learning Sabacc was an experience on stream for me, but the high stake matches and the winning feeling is unmatched. It doesn't have the depth of a Gwent or anything like that, but as an open world activity, and for a Star Wars fan, there's a lot to love about Sabacc. The world itself, it's not as dynamic as a GTA, in that you can't just walk into a cantina and start blasting, but there is plenty of opportunities in the world that are both interactive and passive. There's a mini game with Nix that you sit down and you eat food and you press buttons at certain times that, if you do it right, it will net you a reward for Nix. There's little mini arcade games that you can play, you can bet on Canto bike races, and you can even find intel that'll help you win your bets. There's contract brokers for once you get a good enough reputation with the syndicate, little areas to explore and traverse in the world that contain treasures used as either a precious resource for an upgrade or a cosmetic outfit. There's of course the much anticipated wanted system that, to be honest with you, was a bit of a letdown in practice as a result of how fickle the enemy AI can be, but it's still fun having death troopers track you down, or having to sneak back into a city to then speak to an Imperial officer and try and bribe them to get you off the wanted list. Or that pursuit can go another way where you try and flee the planet and the Imperials chase you in space and you're trying to get out of there. It's an evolved take on Ubisoft's open world formula that's good open world, but great Star Wars. And that's something that shouldn't be missed too. A game is often praised and critiqued on its systems. One of the features of Star Wars Outlaws is it's Star Wars. It leans so heavily into the IP. Whether that's just being in a cantina and chilling with a Trandoshan, Rodian, Zabrak, Mon Calamari, and they all look fantastic. Whether it's the down and dirty bribes of the underworld. And then there's a sprinkling of cameos throughout the game that make sense and don't rub your face in it. But the game itself is just so authentic down to the smallest details. Like being on an Imperial ship and doors closing and conversations going from being fully hearable to all muffled. The droid noises and the beeping around the environments and the behaviour of them. The punch of engaging the hyperdrive. The references to what's happening between episodes 5 and 6, from being on the nose to the more subtle stuff that happens in comics. The sound of the blaster fire and the impact of it. The weapons that you can pick up. You can explore Luke's home. You can see Kijimi and Canto Bight in ways that the movie only partially allowed us to see. It's not just a Ubisoft Star Wars game. It's massive design and world building applied to Star Wars. The game looks jaw-dropping. Yes, the facial animations are absolutely terrible. Like, really bad. But I'm fortunate enough to play this on a 4090. And from an environmental perspective, when everything is clicking, the ray trace reflections and shadows, the direct lighting, the density of the environments, it is without doubt one of the best looking games I have ever seen. And I am not kidding. And when you pair that with being a Star Wars fan, it's a level of immersion that only really the Rise of the Resistance ride can provide you at Disneyland. The way the snow falls on Kijimi and lands on your character, the droplets of rain on Akiva as you look out over the river, or Mos Eisley Spaceport where you'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. It's not just a good looking Star Wars game, it captures the vibe and the tone of the original trilogy from all those years ago. At times, it genuinely looks like a tech demo. I'm serious. The way the lighting in the Imperial bases shines onto a Stormtrooper's armour, or the lights in the cantina, or the detail of every Star Wars race. It can be an absolute dream for fans. Before I wrap this up, the sound design deserves a mention. It is absolutely excellent, and helps create that sense of immersion that I'm speaking about here. But one important note is the score. It's fantastic. It feels right for Star Wars, but it also helps Outlaws carve out its own little corner in this universe. And there's a moment at the end where it triumphantly roars, And that moment helped cement this score as a really, really special soundtrack. So, Star Wars Outlaws then. Look, I said at the start, I don't disagree with the collection of 7 out of 10 scores that this game received. It is a flawed video game that leaves a really tough first impression. But that's also why I've just never loved scores on games. I've played better games this year, but I haven't enjoyed many like this. It's why we've got to stop the idea of 7 out of 10s being bad. A game can have flaws in its design, and aspects of it can still be a wonderful time. And I miss the days where a game would be a 7 out of 10 and its sequel would make a generational jump. And that goes back to what I said at the start. It reminds me of the Jedi games in that. I'd love to see a sequel if that's what the team wanted to do. Address the opening of the game and how those encounters are presented, flesh out the crime syndicate to have more of an impact in the main narrative, and diversify some of the encounters that you get from that system. I think of the jumps that Survivor had in tightening up the combat, the movement, the traversal, the rewards, and the exploration. Outlaws, I think, almost begs a sequel. One that can maybe explore the gap between 6 and 7, and expand and deliver on what those early seasons of The Mandalorian delivered. Right now, it's painful for me to say actually, it's really tough to recommend. Experiencing a game-breaking bug as the final cutscene is about to be delivered is rough. PS5 players having to start over after buying 110 quid of early access is rough. And for those reasons, in good faith, right now, I just can't recommend Star Wars Outlaws. Not till the bugs are ironed out and the game has had a couple of patches. The game, no doubt, it's coming hot. But hopefully patches can address that. And after those patches, I really do believe that for fans of Star Wars, this is a must experience. Whether that's at full price, whether it's for a month of Ubisoft Plus, or it's on sale down the line. And for those not into Star Wars, it's a tougher sell. I do think that this is a great take on Ubisoft's open world formula, and it can maybe allow you to understand why people really do love Star Wars. For me, this is the answer to Ubisoft's open world fatigue. I think Star Wars Outlaws is the open world Star Wars game they've been waiting for. It has a rough few opening hours. Its combat is quite shallow, and at launch, it's just plagued by technical issues. But Star Wars Outlaws is a game of patience, and for me, after my 25 hours, that patience is rewarded. That's my thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws. I really enjoyed myself despite a lot of flaws, but what have you thought? Are you on the same page as me? Have you played it, or are you holding off for now? Let me know. Just stay civil please in the comments down below, it's all I ever ask. If you enjoyed hearing my thoughts, as always, dropping a like would be really appreciated, and hey, maybe consider subscribing. There's more Outlaws content on the way, as well as reviews for other games that are releasing in the next few weeks. Other than that, all my socials are linked in the description down below, so any questions, just go ask me on there. Regardless, I hope you have a terrific day, look after yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.